Well, the U.S. has announced a strategy to deepen ties with allies in Southeast Asia. It includes plans to cooperate on defense and intelligence. A U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has slammed what he calls China's aggression as he spoke in Jakarta. Saiful Bara Ismail reports.
Mr. Blinken arrived in Jakarta on Monday, kicking off a Southeast Asian trip aimed at strengthening ties with the region that has become a strategic arena for Washington and Beijing. He met Indonesian President Joko Widodo and congratulated Indonesia on its G20 presidency and expressed support for its leadership in the group. On Tuesday, Mr. Blinken delivered a policy speech on the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. He pledged to work with its allies and partners to defend the rules-based order that has been built together over decades to ensure the Indo-Pacific remains open and accessible.
Let me be clear about one thing. The goal of defending the rules-based order is not to keep any country down. Rather, it's to protect the right of all countries to choose their own path, free from coercion, free from intimidation. It's not about a contest between a U.S.-centric region or a China-centric region. The Indo-Pacific is its own region.
On the political crisis in Myanmar, Mr. Blinken said Washington was committed to pressing the military leaders to end the violence, free detainees, and return to an inclusive democracy. Mr. Blinken also met with his Indonesian counterpart, Retno Marsudi, and reiterated a strong American commitment to its strategic partnership with Indonesia and to their engagement on the South China Sea. The U.S. and Indonesia signed several joint agreements, including one on maritime cooperation.
MOU antara lain mencakup kerjasama keamanan maritim, sumber daya kelautan, konservasi dalam pengelolaan perikanan, serta keselamatan dan navigasi maritim. Dan guna memperkuat kerjasama di bidang keamanan, kita sepakat membentuk mekanisme dialog 2+2, Kementerian Luar Negeri, Kementerian Pertahanan di tingkat pejabat senior.
Mr. Blinken's four-day tour of Southeast Asia also includes Kuala Lumpur and Bangkok, where he's expected to deliver similar messages. Southeast Asia is a key stage for a rivalry between the United States and China, with a heated struggle for influence as the U.S. seeks to reconnect with the region. The U.S. is also planning to host an in-person summit between President Joe Biden and leaders of the ASEAN member countries in Washington early next year. The summit will be the first face-to-face meeting between Mr. Biden and the ASEAN leaders since he took office in January this year. Saiful Bara Ismail, CNA, Jakarta.
Live to Simon Marks for more. Simon, the Biden administration wants to boost defense and intelligence capabilities with its Indo-Pacific partners. Any specifics on how?
Well, Jill, they'd clearly be seeking to discuss some of those specifics at that in-person meeting that President Biden is hoping to host here in Washington in the early stage of next year. But the contours of this are apparent, and they rest partly in that agreement on maritime cooperation that was unveiled there in Jakarta between the United States and Indonesia. This is about deepening ties with all members of ASEAN, particularly, of course, America's treaty allies, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines, putting a greater focus on freedom of navigation exercises and other maritime exercises to make it clear that the region more broadly, and the United States definitely specifically, wants to try and guarantee freedom of navigation, even as China expresses its territorial aspirations with regard to the South China Sea. There's also an agreement that was unveiled by the Trump administration to provide more drones, high-tech drones, payload-carrying drones to ASEAN members. That's already in place, but could see the delivery of fresh equipment in the months and years ahead. More broadly, of course, what the Secretary of State was seeking to do there was to underscore President Biden's message that America's connection with ASEAN, its involvement in the region, is back and back to stay. The difficulty the Secretary of State will encounter on his travels, as he does wherever he goes, is that in many parts of the world, people look at domestic political developments here in the United States and wonder if, in fact, those promises can be kept, given the uncertainty about what lies ahead here.
Our next stop for Blinken is Malaysia and Thailand. Now, these two countries have a good relationship with the US. So what's on the agenda for this leg of the trip?
Well, in addition to bilateral relationships, it's clear that this next leg of the trip is going to be about three things. It's going to be about infrastructure and supply chains, it's going to be about vaccine diplomacy, and it is going to be about Myanmar. On the issue of supply chains, the Secretary of State wants to explore alternatives to the supply chain difficulties that are besetting the region and, of course, the United States itself. Vaccine diplomacy, a fresh commitment for the United States, in Joe Biden's words, to be the arsenal of vaccines for the rest of the world, even as the White House is expressing concerns here about what it says is too slow an adoption of boosters by American citizens themselves. And on the issue of Myanmar, a desire really to push ASEAN to engage in a more coordinated, more harmonious approach to Myanmar that is in keeping with America's much harder line approach ever since, of course, the coup earlier this year, and particularly the jailing of Aung San Suu Kyi. So those three issues are going to dominate. There will, of course, be specific bilateral issues also that are on the agenda in both countries.
Thank you, Simon. Simon Marks reporting live from Washington, D.C.